Hi guys, it's Wendy from Ask the Landlady. I'm here with all the tips and tricks to help you make a profit in real estate investments. And today I want to tell you about a landlord I came across. Good person, owns 3 units, has been renting them for about 8 years with zero real problems, right? But last year he had a tenant quit paying rent. Classic situation. And he just had not had that happen before because he had these long-term tenants. So he didn't quite know what to do. And he did what he thought was right right? Okay. He sent a text message saying, you need to leave. And then he went in and changed the locks and took everybody's stuff out so they could move somebody else in. He's now on the losing end of a huge lawsuit, right? Unlawful lockout, statutory damages, the tenant's attorney fees. Total exposure is close to $40,000 at a minimum on a unit that rents for $1,500 a month. His mistake wasn't malice. His mistake was operating on rules that he learned a long time ago or he thought were in place that he hadn't looked into or exercised over the past 8 years. And this whole legal environment that has fundamentally changed. And he had no idea. So, not malice, but definitely ignorance and not knowing how things have changed and how you need to operate in today's climate as a real estate investor. The tenant rights landscape in the US has shifted dramatically over the past several years. And of course, we saw that during COVID when you could not file evictions in some areas of the country. And it's still shifting. We have new just cause law, eviction laws. We had new things about emotional support animals and fair housing things. And they tend to go back and forth. I'll go extreme one way and then kind of mediate back. So we're having all this type of thing go down here. And if you have not specifically reviewed your obligations in your area where you are renting property in the last 12 months, then you may be exposed in ways that you do not know about. So today I'm going to walk you through what has changed, what's still changing, and critically, what you need to do to protect yourself in this environment. Okay, so let's go. Welcome back to Ask the Landlady. Quick note before we start, today's episode covers legal topics. And while I'm going to give you some solid practical advice, I am not an attorney. I am not your attorney. And the specific rules in your jurisdiction may differ from what I'm describing here today. Okay. My goal is just to let you know what things could be happening and to ask questions. So go to the attorneys in your market and your city officials and have those productive conversations. And make sure that you have not been out of compliance for the last 8 years or last 2 years or whatever. So the framing I want to use for this episode is this: the tenants' right movement is not a conspiracy against landlords, even though sometimes it seems like it is. It is a real data-driven response to housing affordability that has made millions of renters genuinely vulnerable, right? And I don't say that to lecture anyone, but because I think landlords who understand the why behind these laws are better positioned to adapt to them, right? Because sometimes you could say, it is what it is. Even believe me, I know there's some stupid laws out there on the books in your jurisdictions, and those are the ones you're just like, whatever. This is obviously just a money grab from the city. It's not really helping even the tenants. But sometimes there are things that are driven to try to assist tenants with getting better access to affordable housing, and that is a good thing for everyone. It is not an attack against landlords. So you want to understand the landscape. You want to adapt your operations, and you want to protect yourself. Okay, that's the goals for today. So let me go back to my friend's story because it kind of illustrates almost everything in one example, right? Because here's what he did wrong, step by step. Number one, he communicated via text message instead of in a formal written notice. Okay, formal written notice is always your friend. And I know some of you operate under a portal, which I do. I use Appfolio, and there's a portal. Those things can all, just remember, anything that you put out there, even in text, can come back to haunt you. So he might say, oh, it was just a text message. It was just saying, get out, whatever. Always go through your formal guidelines in your state or your jurisdiction. Here I am in Ohio. We need to provide tenants with a 3-day written notice. It's a formal notice that we can post to their door, hand deliver, send certified mail, and now the courts, I believe, are now letting us do it via email through our portal. We usually do several of them because we want to get your attention if you're not paying rent, and we don't want to have any mistakes or anything get thrown out in court because we did not provide the best, communication with our tenant, the best legal, for all parties concerned. So mistake number 2 is the landlord went in and changed locks. You can't do that. Guys, you can't do that anymore. You haven't been able to do that for a long time, but I still hear about landlords who do this, a self-help eviction, right? I do, there are times, believe me, I'd love to be those people back in Texas back in the day. I'm talking like 30 years ago. They were able to like turn off all the utilities and they could take the door off the unit. Like, how great would that be? Yeah, I'd be taking those doors down too if people aren't willfully not paying rent. But you cannot do that. No, you can't do that. I'd say everywhere. You can't just go in and change lots. The tenant has a right to re-enter the property to gain their possessions, and they have time in which to get legal counsel to fight an eviction or to try to get time enough to be able to move to another location. So never, ever, ever do that. That will expose you to so much liability. It'll be terrible. And mistake 3, which I've already said, is this landlord just assumed old rules still applied. He had heard, his dad had the 3 units before him. That's what his dad used to do. He just did what his dad did. No, it's definitely different now. You cannot do that. So don't. So the biggest structural change in landlord-tenant law over all this time, the past 5 years, is the just cause eviction, or called maybe the good cause eviction. Under traditional landlord-tenant law in most of the country, you could decline to renew a lease or terminate a month-to-month tenancy for any reason, or no reason at all, as long as proper notice was given. This was called a no-fault termination. You give 30-day notice, the tenant leaves, done. If the tenant tries to hold over, you could actually do a real eviction, okay? But you could simply ask your tenant to leave. But just cause eviction laws change that entirely. They require tenants to have a specific, legitimate reason, a just cause to evict a tenant or to non-renew the lease. If the tenant isn't in violation of anything, you can't remove them simply because you want a different tenant or you want to jack up the rent by $300 higher than what the law will allow you in your area, or because you just decide you don't like that tenant. You have a weird feeling about him or her. You can't do that. The standard of this just causes typically include things like non-payment of rent. That's easy. Okay. A material violation of the lease terms, substantial damage to the property. Maybe you've done an eviction. There's a ton of damage. You want to nip this in the bud, of course. Nuisance behavior. You've had several calls to law enforcement with violations of noise or domestic abuse, those types of things, and it's impacting your other tenants at the property. Absolutely. Criminal activity. That's an easy one if you can get a police report. And in most laws, if you decide you want to move into the space, or your child does, or you want to do a substantial renovation to that property, those could be reasons that you could do that. Because those are all legitimate reasons. What the just cause laws was trying to prohibit is something arbitrary, retaliatory. Maybe they keep turning you into code enforcement and you're just like, oh, I want them out of here. Or discriminatory type stuff. You can't do that. You cannot do that. You have to have a just cause before you non-renew a lease or provide them with a 30-day notice to leave. Okay. So who has to comply with that kind of thing now? Definitely in California, a lot of you guys in New York, Washington State, Maryland, lots of places, and maybe your area. Shoot me a comment. Are your area seeing these just cause reasons that you have to provide before non-renewal of lease? Love to hear about it. So another thing we should talk about is rent control, which is a definitely politically charged topic in all of landlord-tenant law, and the one where rules have been changing very actively. First, let's clarify the vocabulary here. Rent control, in its strictest historical term, means a cap on the rent that a landlord can charge, full stop. Okay. Rent stabilization is typically more moderate. It limits how much you can increase the rent in a given year. Like maybe you can only increase it with inflation. Maybe you can only increase it 5%. It's trying to keep people from putting these huge things, huge increases on there, because you know that demand is high, right? For you gouging people, price gouging. So usually it's going to be tied to inflation or some sort of fixed percentage. And that's mainly what's happening now. A lot more, you've heard of rent control, but now rent stabilization is something that's hitting areas besides New York. It's hitting Oregon, it's hitting California, it's hitting maybe your state, I don't know, certain cities, I believe like Cleveland, certain cities are putting that into place too. And you need to know before you go out there and try to say, oh, I'm going to raise rent on everybody 20%. And then you find out you can't do that. And then you find out you're slapped with some big lawsuit, right? Make sure you know what you can do before you do it. Okay. Another compliance minefield lately is security deposits. Because that's where I see a lot of landlords, even very experienced ones, rack up some avoidable liability. Okay. Because the rules around these deposits have changed significantly in the last couple of years. Let's talk about California first of all. They've capped security deposit at 1 month's rent. That's it. If you've been collecting 2 months' rent, which a lot of people have, they'll try to collect the first and last month's rent. You can't do that. Okay. I can't do that in Ohio, or I can, but then I have to provide interest. That's why I only do 1 month's rent. And that exists in some areas too. Maybe you can ask for that other one, but you have to pay your tenant interest on that. So that's something to be thinking about, because you do not want to be out of compliance. Another thing that happens with the security deposit process is photo documentation is required. In California, they have to do photos upon move-in and photos upon move-out. And that's a shift. If you've not been doing that, it's just good practice to start doing that now. We try to do that on all our units, but I get it. You get rushed, you get busy, you're trying to get them in and you don't get that photo documentation, but you may actually be required to have that in order to actually be able to fight any kind of issues with that security deposit. So you wouldn't then have proof at move-in that there wasn't crayon drawings all over the wall, right? If you did your before picture and your after picture, then you definitely have a leg to stand on. So that's a good reason why you should be doing that. And the way you return the security deposit has also been put into law. If they pay electronically, you have to give it to them electronically. If there's 2 roommates, you have to give the money back in a joint check. There's all sorts of little things that can happen with security deposits that may have changed over the years. You may have been doing some other practice all this time that you need to go back and make sure that you're not out of compliance for. And in a lot of areas too, tenants can request a walkthrough or an inspection where the landlord comes in with the tenant. We go around and we say, well, you know, that used to have a latch on it, or you're missing a window blind that was here when you came in, or there's a hole in the carpet, and you have to give the tenant time to remedy those issues before you do your actual calculating of the security deposit. Again, this is a pain in the butt, especially if you have a lot of units and you have another full-time job like me, right? It's a lot of work, but it's something that you may have to start doing or may already be doing in your area. So I don't know there. So I'd love to hear in the comments, any of you guys having to deal with that, with having to do those inspections, allowing the tenants to remedy those issues, any problems with security deposits overall. This is how we all learn. Shoot those things in the comment. And while you're at it, give me a like, give me a subscribe so we can keep talking about these kind of issues there. So, all right. So there are also now some new disclosure requirements that you probably don't know about. Okay. And right to counsel notice in some cities like Los Angeles, tenants have to provide, landlords have to provide tenants with a notice to right of counsel at the beginning of their tenancy, attached to any eviction notice served and posted in common areas of the building. So that's something new. If you're not doing that and you're in Los Angeles, you better start doing that. Get that notice to right of counsel, give it at the lease, give it if you file an eviction, and have it posted in any common areas if you have some apartment buildings, multi-family types of stuff. That's a new law, just not even a year in here, and that you may not know about. There are also transparency laws in several jurisdictions that require tenants or landlords to disclose rent history, prior fees, and building inspection records before a tenant signs the lease. And that's rapidly expanding because, tenants are allowed to know this type of information. You may have to actually disclose that to your tenants. I know here you already have, if you have anything built before 1978, right, you have to provide that lead paint disclosure. So it'd be similar to that, but on other issues as well. Sometimes those of you who are renting places without appliances, a lot of things that are changing is about what constitutes what is habitable. And a lot of places are saying you need to provide that stove and refrigerator in order to be habitable. So that's something, they're treating it just like your, furnace and your hot water tank. which means when they break, you have to be fixing those things as well. So that's something you may need to look at in your area as well. Post-disaster protections. Sometimes you need to have a disaster plan. I know I do in Ohio for our multi-units. You have to have a disaster plan that you post in certain areas for that. And there might be some application fee restrictions. That's getting a lot of ground. If somebody a tenant is out there looking for an apartment and they're applying several places, they should be able to get that background check in a paper version of it and use it for all their applications versus paying me $30, paying them $50, paying them $60, whatever your application fee is. What is your application fee? Shoot me a comment. I would love to know. Mine's $30 right now in 2026. So would love to know if you're having to deal with that now too, because that's something that, I get it. If you're trying to find an apartment, why should you pay 5 different application fees? So a lot of times you have to accept that background check that has already occurred, which for those of you like me using that fully, it's kind of a pain, right? Because then we got to enter that information in because, when they do the background check, it's all nicely in the computer already, which saves us some time, which I love. But anyway, things change. You got to be aware of it and you got to know and you got to stay compliant. So how do you protect yourself as a landlord? You got so much to do. This is a pain, Wendy. I don't want to do this. I know. But step 1, review your lease every year, okay? Annually, without exception. If you have an attorney that you work with regularly, have him or her look over it. It's worth a couple $100s to stay compliant. Run it through AI. Say, hey, look at my laws here in Oregon and check out my lease. Am I in compliance? That will be telling. That will tell you what clauses are working and possibly not working that you need to change. Step 2, document everything. This is the society we live in, right? Everybody's out there taking a picture and documenting when fights go down and stuff goes down. You need to adapt too. So you do it or your property manager does it. Somebody does it where you document before and after photos. You document everything. If you're communicating with the tenant, you just don't say things verbally or in a text, that you have formal written notices that comply with your local laws, okay? Never ever, this is the big one, never ever self-help evict, okay? Don't change the locks. Don't turn off utilities. Don't do anything that could get you in serious trouble. Don't throw their belongings out. Most states require you, even if they just abandon the place, to store those things for at least 30 days. Document that. You can charge storage fees. You can charge that. But if you throw them away and somebody says, oh, I was just in jail and I'm back for all my stuff, wow, that would be a huge lawsuit. So don't ever do that. Number 3. Number 4, build an attorney relationship before you need one. Have somebody that you go and talk to every once in a while. That way, when you do have an eviction, it's going to be very easy for you. You've got somebody already there that you trust, that you've talked about things, who's looked over your stuff, is familiar with what you're doing. It's a necessary evil. It's worth the money in the long run to pay that attorney versus pay a huge lawsuit, okay? And lastly, just try to stay current on your local laws. If you have a landlord association, go to it. If you, every once in a while, maybe just go down and talk to your local building code people and say, hey, let me just run some things by you. Am I still in compliance with everything? Anything new come about that I need to know? Take them donuts. It's a great idea to do. I love it when people bring me donuts. Yeah, I'll talk to you all day. What do you want to know? They'll give you all sorts of information if you do that. So here is my position on this tenant rights revolution. More regulation is coming. Buckle up. It's not just a prediction. It's a trend that's been accelerating, and we can see it in the data. And it's driven by a real housing affordability crisis, right? We already know building costs are so high, we're not able to build things. We know with the economy that we're all struggling for the same demand and supply issue. So you need to stay informed. You need to document everything. Treat your tenants with basic dignity and respect. Always try to think back, well, if I'm running this place, how would I want it to be done? Of course. But here's the bottom line. Being a landlord or landlady is a business, right? And businesses have compliance obligations. I think for a long time, as some real estate, we've been pretty complacent, right? We see it as different because, we're dealing with people's intimate spaces where they live, their houses. So it doesn't feel the same as like somebody walking into your grocery store and buying stuff. But it's still a business. It's still going to have regulations. It's still going to have consumer protections. And so we need to be aware of that and adjust our practices accordingly. So what are you doing? Go get your lease, scan it into your computer, run it through ChatGPT, talk to your landlord association, update your procedures, and do everything you can to protect yourself. Because at the end of the day, it's not easy being a landlord or landlady, right? And so we're all in this together. So try to learn from each other. Get my book on Amazon. Still relevant. Lessons from the Landlady. I also have all my forms. If you have not been doing forms and not been documenting things properly, this is the best $20 you're ever going to spend. I swear. It is all my forms, easy, so you can just copy and use them. I also have them on my website, askthelandlady.com, and you can just download the packet and write your own name on them, phone number, and zip them out there. So if you're not using forms, get that. Protect yourself. So there you have it. I hope this was useful. I want to hear from you. I would like a like. I'd like a comment. I'd like a subscribe. I just want to be liked. Even though I'm a landlady, we get such a bad rap. Like, we don't care if anybody likes us because we don't like them. Well, I do. And like me. And let's keep going through this real estate adventure together. Thanks. Have a great day.